We can review. So this week we finalized expressions. Mainly we talked about plus equals, minus equals. I didn't exclusively talk about them, but I mentioned them in examples that I did this week. Okay, Boolean logic. It is important to understand the logical operators and, or, and not. These truth tables here will help you determine how to set up Boolean expressions. So we know the and, both of them have to be true for the result to be true. For or, it's the opposite. Both of them have to be false for the result to be false, otherwise true. And for not, we simply negate. So truth becomes false, false becomes uh, true, okay? C++ and Boolean logic, we have the operators and, or, and not, the symbols, double ampersand, the pipe, and then exclamation for not. Relational operators, double equals, less than equal, greater than equal, not equal. Order of precedence, not has highest precedence than and finally or. It is important to understand this because it can help you set up Boolean expressions. We were introduced to the conditional structure if and then if else. Again, curly braces for if are optional, however, consider them mandatory or required. This will save you troubleshooting issues in the future. So notice a Boolean expression is required, meaning anything that evaluates to true or false, okay? Else, if else, so if this is true, this piece executes, otherwise if false, and this piece executes. Notice right here, there's no Boolean expression, okay? The if else if, so Boolean expression, else if, and then else. So we can have more than one else if, and notice the else if does require a Boolean expression. The switch statement, we have the switch, something that evaluates to an int variable, and then we have case 1, case 2, up to case n. Default means anything that does not satisfy any of the cases. In other words, this functions as the else, okay? Immediate if, so we have a x less than 0, execute this, else execute this. Okay, so very handy. Use it sparingly and make sure it's not used to where it makes the code unreadable. Okay, so we jumped to repetition structures and we introduced the while loop. So we have a while Boolean expression. Notice no semicolon here. We do not have to use the open close curly brace, but if you do not use them, then only one statement after the while loop is executed. That's the same thing that happens to the if structure. Okay, so please be aware of that. It's always better just to use open close curly brace to avoid any issues in the future. So we have some code, and then we need some code that changes the Boolean expression to false. Okay, so we need something here that changes this from true to false. That way the loop can stop executing. We covered the for loop, and this one, we need a variable here that's initialized. We need a Boolean expression that eventually evaluates to false, and increment decrement. We can add one or decrement one or more, or one or more, or one or more, sorry. Or if we're counting down, it could be like -5 or -1, whatever, right? And we didn't get to the do while. We'll get to that in the next class. Briefly, let me just cover the examples that we went through in class briefly. I will just point out the ones I feel are important. So the if, I think it's a no-brainer. I think students should be familiar with this one. Oops, let me find it. Data types. Well, actually, it wasn't data types, right? It was conditionals. Okay, so we created some functions just to show you that we can return true or false using Boolean expressions. And then we created some to show the order of precedence. And then in main, we created an if statement first, just to show you how we write it in code, even evaluates to true or false. And then we added the else, right? So simple if statement, that's how you can use one. Then we skipped if else because I had already shown an example there. And then we went to this example that shows us an if else if with else at the end. We use Boolean expressions using the AND operator, and then we wrote some test code to go over this. Okay, so I'm not going to go in detail. And then briefly, finally, we covered the switch statement. And this is how we'd set one up. Important thing to remember about the switch statement, omitting breaks will cause case one and case two to execute. So anytime you're writing the switch, if you do not need to execute two cases, then always use a break. There may be cases when you want to cover a range where you want to omit the break. But with the new language support, then that's not required anymore, right? Because now the new language supports ranges in a case statement. And I'll provide an example on this coming week. Okay, we covered the while loop. Very simple loop to use. So we need a loop that evaluates to true to keep on executing. And eventually this expression has to evaluate to false, right? So meaning we need some code in here to make it false. So then we use the unary operator minus minus, meaning subtract one from whatever num currently is. And eventually this evaluates to false. And then we had some summing simple examples just to show the loop structure. And then we showed also how to iterate a string. And a string, we need an indexer. We loop from index to string dot size less than, right? So meaning like if size is 5, we can only go up to 4 because we started 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we don't want to go beyond the memory range of a string. So that's why we do it like this. And again, I covered this extensively in class. Then finally, we covered the for loop, very simple example. So we simply said initializer, Boolean expression, increment, decrement, okay? Okay, so that was it. So also, I am changing from Google Meet to Zoom mainly because this last two classes has just been very frustrating. I know for you all it has, and it has been for me, losing the microphone and my microphone being muted. So I've changed to Zoom, and I'm hoping that we won't have those issues, right? So hopefully everything goes well. If you have any questions, by all means, please let me know. Okay, thanks.